Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming back so promptly. I hope you are all happy and have had at least one pastry. I did leave a few. We're now going to talk about challenges and opportunities in the agri-tech ecosystem. As you will see, our panel is assembled like the Avengers, just less lycra. They will be taking questions at the end of this session, so please get your questions in early on Slido. Equally, if you are with us here in the hall, you can just stick your hand up later and we'll get a microphone to you. I'm going to sit down and have another cup of tea because Phil Bicknell, Director at CL, is taking over for this session. Over to you.
Thanks. I thought I was going to be handed the clipboard of power there, but obviously not. No, just keeping hold of it. The minister started by kind of looking back about a decade, so I'm going to do the same. And I guess it would have been just over a decade ago that I attended an animal welfare conference, and it was hugely interesting. Some really insightful research on issues like mastitis, stuff that could save millions of pounds for the dairy sector, tens of millions even. Addressing stuff like foot problems in sheep, which has just been a continual challenge for that sector. Some really insightful areas about optimizing daily live weight gain in cattle. I kind of had the same response to each of those really technical speeches about, that's all really interesting, but what's the plan for communicating that, sharing the findings more widely, and having impact on farm? And it felt as if the conference was kind of almost the beginning and end of that journey. It felt as if that awareness raising, that engagement was just being missed. And it was a phenomenal opportunity, I think, that was being missed. And it almost felt as if some key issues weren't breaking out of a theoretical bubble. As I say, that was over a decade ago. And I guess it turns out I wasn't the only one thinking along those lines. Because it was around that time that the early foundations of an agri-tech strategy were being laid, as we heard earlier. And that, of course, was a strategy that ultimately would be the catalyst for where we are today, and particularly where we are from an agri-tech centre's perspective. And I guess from my perspective, addressing real-world challenges, communication and impact, they're all to the fore whenever we're talking about agri-tech right now. And it's inherent in what we try and do across the centres. And for me, joining CL a couple of years ago, it's probably been the most rewarding aspect of my role. Businesses that want to fix real-world problems, academics and experts that want science to provide practical and profitable solutions to the industry. And a real willingness to park corporate or organisational stripes and tackle some common challenges that we face across the agri-food sector. And our industry, of course, is never without its challenges. And as we've heard this morning, we're again laying the foundations for the continued development of agri-tech in the UK, a really exciting phase and stage ahead for us. So what better time really than to look at some of the challenges and opportunities that our industry faces. And that's going to be the focus of the next session. As Charlotte said, she's going to take a break for a little while, but what she is going to do is keep tabs on any questions that come through on Slido. We're also going to take questions from the floor after we've heard from all our speakers. We've got roving mics and we are going to use them. We've got some great speakers lined up who are just going to share some of their initial thoughts. We're aiming for a maximum of 5 minutes from each, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions. And as a moderator of this sort of panel, particularly when you've got some great speakers, it's fantastic because you think this is going to be really good. But you're also a little bit nervous that they might say the same thing, which I'm sure they won't. But in introducing each, I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts that I hope they kind of touch on in their opening 5 minutes. And we're going to start with Steve McLean from M&S and work across. So as I hand over to the next, I'll just say a couple of words about kind of what I'd like to see them picking up. And Steve, you're first up. I'm not going to share each's bio or background on business because I anticipate you'll share a bit of that in terms of what you say. But I'm really keen to hear from you from a retailer perspective about how you manage some of those ag challenges, some of those things that are long-term investments, and how you balance that with some of the short-term pressures. And I suppose I've also got a really big question about the kind of stuff we're doing in agriculture, a big focus on sustainability. Will shoppers pay for it?
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much. I'm clearly privileged. I'm not going to be repeating what anybody else has said because I'm the first speaker, so that's a really good position for me. we've got a number of very key focuses within M&S. I'm not going to pretend that M&S is significantly different from any other retailer in the context of the challenges that we have in meeting societal demands around decarbonisation, net zero strategies, but also being very clear around quality and affordability for consumers. And we have to recognise that those competing themes don't necessarily align, which, if we're being negative, creates a whole load of challenges, but also creates great opportunities around where agri-tech investment and supply chain structures and the ability to influence and work with farmers to do things differently comes about. I think we also need to be very mindful too that consumers, I suspect through social media, are probably more sceptical around farming, farmers, retailers, supply chain, and whether they really do have the best interests of customers at heart. And that's an area that we work very hard in trying to ensure that we never disappoint the customer and that trust is built into everything that we do. I do think that there is an urgent need for the UK agricultural sector to demonstrate better than it probably currently does that it is truly competitive in a global market. Now, clearly, we're a UK retailer. We source from 8,500 UK farms. There's very little in the protein sector that we actually import these days. So we're reliant on a thriving agricultural supply chain. And we're reliant on a supply chain that can help us differentiate from our competitors. And that differentiation at one time would have been solely focused on quality. And now increasingly it's that balance between quality and demonstrating that farming is doing great stuff for the environment, rather than, as it seems to come across in certain sectors, it's to blame for the ills of the environment. I want to be really clear. Farming does a great job. We need to find ways of telling the story of the great job it does better, and we absolutely recognise that we have a part to play in that as well. But at the same time, where we do have challenges, we need to find innovative solutions to those challenges. I do think we want to create an industry and need to create an industry where not only do we attract the very best talent, but we secure that talent for the long term. Agriculture is sexy if you're into the lifestyle. And I'm very fortunate that not only do I work for M&S, but I farm as well. So I get the benefits of that. But it can't just be about the lifestyle. We need to attract the best talent, reward the best talent, and actually get the benefit from that best talent in an evolving industry. And I will pick up on the bit around consumers and value. We're at a really interesting place with consumers and what they do value. Quality is a given. Animal welfare is a given. Those are things that you can differentiate product on, and customers are willing to reward you for that. In the environmental space, consumers are currently confused, and net zero, decarbonisation, carbon neutral, it's all things they're hearing about, but they really don't understand what they can do. So as a trusted brand, we recognise that we've got to balance that animal welfare quality piece with environmental messaging, and we need to find ways of demonstrating that we're making improvements in a consumer-friendly way. And if we can do that, then I think customers will be willing to reward the farming sector for those positive activities. But if we can't find a way of getting that message across, I think it becomes increasingly difficult.
Great.
5 minutes.
That's Thanks, Steve. And that probably leads quite nicely, I think, into maybe Helen and NFU perspective. I know kind of really passionate about trying to make sure that policy measures, what NFU is asking for, is science-led, that it is kind of covering a broad church. So really interested to hear a bit from you in terms of what's on your agenda, what's in your pipeline. And I think particularly when I speak to farmers, barriers to innovation is definitely a theme that comes up. So yeah, interested in your thoughts on that.
Definitely, thanks, Phil. So I've been looking at agriculture and horticultural R&D and that landscape for nearly 20 years now, and a lot has changed, and a lot has got better. Some of you will remember, I'm looking at a previous NFU president over there, some of you remember that back in 2008, the NFU had to have a campaign which we titled Why Science Matters for Farming. I would like to think that most people now know why. But the same year, we also co-founded the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Science and Technology in Agriculture, of which actually George Freeman became the chair in 2010. I like to think that was maybe the launch pad into his ministerial career, but certainly I think it would have sowed the seeds in his mind about the Agri-Tech strategy, which came a few years later. You know, this is a long game. But this APPG still going strong, and actually it was instrumental in getting to where we are now, which is to have an active parliament on biotechnology, on the Precision Breeding Act. Really incredible and significant achievement, and something that, as somebody, as I said, that's worked in this area for so long, it was, yeah, a kind of career highlight, I think. And if the implementation goes well, looking at Tim, if it goes well, I think it will really position the UK as a global leader in this particular technology for the farming and food sector. So, as we heard from the Minister earlier, government signals like that through policy, through funding, incentives, actually the research infrastructure and regulation are so influential to those that are looking to invest in innovation. If a country shows that it's genuinely open for business, then I think business will come. But there's volatility here, like there is in all the sectors and every aspect of our sector. And volatility, whether it's in a farm business or a tech business or a research organisation or even in a government body, volatility really, it leads to uncertainty. It leads to stress, reduced confidence, and all of those things are working in the opposite direction to innovation. I do want to be positive, and I do tend to be positive, and it is really good to look forward and be enthusiastic about the future opportunities. But I also think it's really important to take the time and the energy now to actually reflect on what's gone well in the past and maybe what hasn't gone well, to identify what we could have done better and then to actually do it better next time. So that's certainly true of the next phase of development of the centres and becoming catapults. Unfortunately, I suspect a lot of farmers and growers are yet to become aware of the Agri-Tech centres. And this brand recognition that Fraser talked about earlier in terms of catapults, that's not a thing for farmers. They haven't heard of catapults, the existing catapults. So I think the outreach and the promotion of the catapults, including to the farming sector, is going to be absolutely vital, not only at the beginning, but as an ongoing project through the life of the catapult. My vision of success in terms of evidence and R&D is that we get to a point where the majority of farmers are genuinely aware of an engagement with evidence and R&D. The evidence that they can actually be using to inform decisions on their farm. And we need a way to get all the knowledge that's generated through all the research programs, DEFRA, Innovate UK, BBSRC, to get that knowledge to far more farmers and growers across the country. Some of you will know the work that I was involved in along with AHDB for many years, talking about a What Works Centre for farming. This idea of having a single interactive mechanism to be embedded within the landscape of R&D and knowledge exchange, gathering the research outputs, putting them into a really robust evidence store, and then translating them into actionable insights by farmers and growers. I still genuinely believe that if we don't have that kind of thing, we're going to limit our return on investment from R&D. And also, if we did have that, it would inform evidence-based policy making and regulation, both in government, but also in agri-food companies. So maybe that's something that the Catapult could consider setting up to be a part of the R&D landscape. Something we're doing now and with the centres, building on Feeding the Future work, which the NFU was part of back in 2013. and it's part of the Agricultural Universities Council joint research strategy that they published recently, is organising workshops for farmers and growers to actually hear from them what their needs are in terms of R&D. I've also been looking at the innovation adoption curve again and thinking about that, and that principle of needing to focus not on persuading people to change, but enabling the innovative tools and practices and technologies to better fit the needs of those people. And then the other important element of that adoption curve is about spreading innovation through conversations, the personal connections and the peer-to-peer networks. And they help to manage and mitigate that risk and that uncertainty that is really inherent in our sector. So maybe those could be part of the kind of first principles that this catapult is going to be built upon. But I've really been encouraged to hear a lot of those thoughts actually reflected in the words of the leaders that we heard from earlier. So I'm encouraged, but you know, the time is now. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Definitely time is now. We're going to move on to hear from a couple of farmers next in terms of Tudor and Andrew, and hopefully a couple of farmers with a bit of awareness of the Agri-Tech centres, or at least the kind of landscape and what we do. And it feels for both of you that adoption is a theme that Helen touched on there. I know it's something you're both passionate about, so perhaps touch on that in terms of the challenges around farmer uptake and farmer adoption. I know Tudor, you've got a livestock perspective, Andrew coming at it from an arable angle.
Hi everyone, I'd just like to say thank you to the Agri-Tech Centres for the opportunity to talk today. It's a huge privilege to represent the farm network and the satellite farms. So I thought I'd give a bit of a background on what we're doing. We're a mixed beef, sheep and arable enterprise in the Brecon Beacons National Park, or is now known as the Banau Brycheiniog. We run an 850-acre unit comprising of 110 stabiliser suckler cows, which are fully performance recorded, and 1,100 breeding ewes, which half of those are now moving across to be a low input outdoor lambing sheep, which is something that I've been implementing since finishing university. As well as this, we grow a range of cereal crops and forage crops to sustain the livestock through the winter. Having finished university in Aberystwyth in 2021, I returned home to farm with all these so-called bright ideas and lots of enthusiasm. Fortunate enough for us that we were then approached to become a satellite farm for Agri-Epi, which we have really enjoyed being part of, and I feel like it came at a very useful time with my enthusiasm for the adoption of technology and how we can use this to better increase efficiency on farm and become more savvy with our inputs rather than and just trying to reduce them in a world that was ever changing with rising input costs. So some of the tech that we've had on farm, we've had a Tapari gun which automatically adjusts the dose rate to the individual weight of the animal, which I think is very useful, not only from a saving in terms of cost, but to prevent anthelmintic resistance through every animal having the appropriate treatment. We've also had the beef monitor, which automatically weighs cattle as they go and drink, and then you can get the weights up on your phone and make decisions in terms of pulling out animals that aren't performing and treating them, or selling animals then as they become ready to sell. This year we've had the no-fence collars, so we farm along with the River Usk, which is a triple SI, and the no-fence collars have allowed us to rotationally graze whilst keeping the animals out of the river without having the issues of putting up permanent fencing, which inevitably gets washed away every winter as it's on a floodplain. So the farm, we are part of the Brecons Water Group, and this kind of ties into the no-fence collars, I think, as a vision of mine for the future. Some of this technology is still quite expensive on a commercial basis, but through collaboration with water companies, I believe that tech such as the no-fence collars could be co-funded, as I think it delivers more benefits than simply the production on farm, but it will deliver increased water quality through stock excluding water quarters. So since coming home to farm, my major focus has been on the continual implementation of rotational grazing. We've become part of the FAI farm network group, looking at holistic management and regenerative farming. So that's something that we've been playing around with this year. As I said earlier, we're in the position of transitioning the sheep flock to an outdoor lambing, lower input system, which is quite exciting for myself, as this is something that's been driven by me then. And then another of my focus is increasing animal health through keeping our own replacements. We're not going to the marketplace and risking buying in diseases such as foot rot or abortion diseases, which I think we can get real growth from in the future. So moving forward, I think as a business we're going to be trying to look to go even closer to reaching our maximum sustainable output, which is our output that we can get through enhancing what rainfall and what sunshine we can get to grow as much grass as possible and get animals that will perform in our system, and then become more labour efficient, and which should allow a better work-life balance. As I think probably my dad's generation probably haven't quite managed to have. And then, adding to Steve's point earlier, I think farmers, farming can be quite glorified in terms of, farming is a lifestyle, but we've got to remember that farming is a business that needs to be profitable before you can have any sort of lifestyle with it, which I think is really important to reflect on today.
Which seems like a good point to end on, actually, Tuna, and move on. I think the talking to you this morning and last night, we were talking about actually doing stuff that makes it easier, makes it better in terms of my business from an environmental perspective, or is going to generate money, and having that focus on those areas, or hopefully all three, was really critical. If we move along the line to Andrew.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, Andrew Pitts, farmer in Northamptonshire. Sustainability, to follow on from you, starts with profitability. If we're not profitable, we can't be sustainable. We all know this. As scientists in the room helping our business, we need your science to drive our business forward. Our big challenges are the weather, which we can do very little about, and politics, which hopefully Tim can do something about as DEFRA. But we need to build our businesses more resilient. We do that by changing the way we farm, managing the soil better. We learn this not directly from you guys as scientists. Farmers tend to learn best from farmers. We have this peer-to-peer learning, which is really valuable. So you as a demonstration farm for Agri-Tech is brilliant. We're a demonstration farm for BSF and Hutchinson's, what have you. Getting farmers on farm to teach each other. You ask questions that no one would ask in front of a scientist, but we need your science badly. My biggest challenge is insects at the moment. So I can't grow certain crops that I really want to because of insect pests. And we need to work out, and plant breeding, I think, is the answer for that, how we work to breed plants that are tolerant to these insects. Because if we take all the insects away, then we lose everything. So it's really important that. Stephen talked about rewarding farmers. Farmers are the lowest point of the food chain. We're right at the very bottom. And I think we should be higher up. And the reason we should be higher up is, I want you to think about what I'm about to say. We grow your food so you don't have to. We have the most important job in the world, feeding all of you guys so you can go to work, do the other jobs. We're not valued, we're bloody useless, excuse my French, at singing our own praises. So if we can help through consumers like yourself, Stephen, raise awareness of the quality of the work that we do, how we look after the environment, and the environment is really key to us. Talk about lifestyle farming. I get out of bed in the morning, I take my dog for a walk across the farmyard. I've got the best office in the world, but it is an office. I am a businessman who farms, not a farmer. And we need to have the tools that you guys can develop for us, whether they be plant breeding, whether they be nutrition, whether they be crop protection, whether it be something I haven't even thought about yet because you haven't told me about it, some new tech. We need that more than anything. And I'll stop there because otherwise we'll run out of time for questions.
Thanks. So Tim, moving on, look, precision breeding has been mentioned. I know you were kind of personally involved in a lot of the work around that. Regulation always comes up. How do we speed that from innovation? So yeah, a few thoughts from you on government's role.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Well, there's a lot to cover there in 5 minutes. Starting on the regulation point, and does it keep up with technology? I think it's a fair challenge, actually, and it's important to point out that I've been involved in making regulation policy for over 40 years, and it's difficult. It does take a long time. We've got parliamentary procedures, we've got consultations, which take some time. For every person that comes in and tells one of our ministers that this is the piece of legislation you need, there'll be somebody else comes in immediately afterwards and says, no, don't listen to that. This is the legislation you need. And ministers have that difficulty in balancing those viewpoints and making legislation. But there's plenty of positive things we're doing. I spend a lot of time talking to stakeholders, farmers and others to try and get a sense of priorities when it comes to legislation. George Freeman mentioned this morning the Regulatory Horizon Council report, which actually, by coincidence, is published today. And that's landed on ministers' desks. They'll look at that very seriously. It covers quite a narrow area, but a very important one, which is about the regulatory horizon landscape on automation and robotics. But it also looks further forward at the next stages of AI. So that's something that we'll hear more about, and that's good. And then you mentioned precision breeding. Helen's mentioned it as well. It's come up a few times this morning. And I guess that's a nice segue into that bit, really, about an area where, in England, we are responding to the changing world and the opportunities that lie ahead for gene editing, precision breeding. So the bill went through Parliament. It received royal assent, became an act in March this year. It went quite smoothly. I've been involved in quite a few acts of Parliament. They don't always go very smoothly. This one did. Nothing to do with me. It's just it was just very good preparation, good sort of head of steam behind it in terms of the science. There was no conflation between gene editing, which is producing something which can be derived by traditional breeding methods anyway. There's no conflation between that and GM, which was good. And we've got some great examples of work underway already. So in the sugar beet area, British Sugar and I think it's Tropic Biosciences are working together to develop a resistance to virus yellows, which is a nasty disease in sugar beet. Really important, and that ticks all the boxes, which you mentioned, some of which you mentioned earlier, Phil, about fewer pesticides, helping the environment, helping with productivity, reducing costs, etc. So that's just one example of where it could be a real game changer. Gene editing in animals is further down the track, but in the States we're seeing resistance to diseases such as PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. That's been approved in Colombia. It's waiting for US approval. So, there's lots of interest in the UK for us to follow suit. And we have got scientists in genus and elsewhere developing resistance to PRRS. So there's lots of potential there. And just this week, you may have seen in the news and in the newspapers the exciting work that's going on to develop resistance to avian flu. Again, really important stuff. But that's further down the track. And in terms of what we're doing at the moment, just want to mention very briefly the Farming Innovation Programme. It doesn't always get the limelight that I would like to see, but it's a £270 million programme. We're a few years in, it's got a few years to run. Of that 270 million, so far we've got about 125 million out of the door or in the pipeline to go out the door. 17 projects, 17 themed competitions so far, and picking up on Helen's point, we are working closely with industry, so we're adapting the programmes as we go along. So some of them we think, well, we'll turn the tap down on this one and perhaps turn it up on this one. More recently, we've just launched a 5 million investor partnership fund, responding to this problem of, we're great at agri-tech, but we can't get it into especially SME businesses. So this is government funding with investors helping to get those small SMEs off the ground. So lots of positive. And I'll just finish, Phil, by saying that, as a civil servant, I get very excited talking about acts and legislation and process and strategies. But what makes it really worthwhile for me is when, I go and visit farmers, and I was on a farm earlier this week, and they're not talking about those things, but they're actually talking about, wanting to trial new ideas. They're benefiting from some of this funding, and also they're talking about how all this helps make agriculture, horticulture, a modern, forward-looking, dynamic and attractive industry. So that for me makes it all worthwhile. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And last but not least, I'll hand over to Michael. And Michael, you're obviously coming out from a red meat perspective. I suppose I always think about the challenge, particularly when you think about red meat supply chains and tens of thousands of people involved in that in terms of primary producers. How do you get to a position of research priorities? The other bit on red meat feels like carbon and net zero is a real focus. Actually, are we missing something through that laser-like focus? Interested in your thoughts.
No, thank you very much, Phil, and everyone. It's an absolute honour to be here, so thanks for that. It's a very important point. We have an excess of 25,000 suppliers, and when we talk about supply chain management, we should be talking about food producers, and that's something which is often lost within the livestock sector. And why that is important is through our customers, such as Steve there, as a licensed food business operator, we're packing tens of millions of food products per week. So we have a huge responsibility to understand our market. And I guess that's probably one of the key take-homes that I would have is we really need to understand our market, both from the point of view of the supply chain, the food producers, but more importantly, what we're doing is we're looking forward at the end of the supply chain to the consumer, because we're all consumers. So that's where the market starts for us. Yes, there are some givens such as quality, but importantly, when you look at quality within our sector, with 25,000 suppliers or food producers, how do you actually go about that? Quality for us means consistency. It means evolving, that we can actually evolve products through the good, better, best tiering. So there are points of difference within that. And most importantly, when we come back to what we call business sustainability and environmental sustainability are the same thing for us. Because if we're not sustainable from a business perspective, any wishes we have in terms of how we improve how we work with our customers and work with our supply base is futile, because it's not demonstrating a return. So that's what we have to do. Now, when we look at the consumer perspective for us, the big issues that we see are education and what our role is within that. The past 2 to 3 years have been an incredible time, because it has driven technology uptake. Because we couldn't do business the way we used to. Our procurement teams are heavily involved in going up farm drives, and that didn't happen for the best part of 18 months. So luckily enough, through the work we do with Innovate UK and the KTN and our academic partners within the consortia, we benefited hugely from actually driving the uptake of technology within the research and development. And what Innovate gave us was the skill to be able to do that, because we couldn't do it without it. So instead of working with 10, 20, 30 farmers, working with 500 farmers. to make that change. So that is only possible if you really understand what the messages for the consumers are. And when I talk about education, there is a deluge of information being made available at the moment for consumers, and it is very confusing. And I think particularly when we look at this environmental sustainability aspect of that, you only need to look at how brands are handling that outside of private label. And there's a myriad of logos and assurances about what's happening. And even before all of this came along, working with our customers, we have seconds to influence a consumer in terms of the products that they want to pick. But food is much more of a culture than it's ever been. So the reasons to buy have to be communicated very, very quickly. And we talk about that in terms of the impact of doing business. So how can we actually make sure that we're providing consistent quality messages that we can stand over with robust data and distill that into something which is meaningful. I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago in Dublin, hosted by Board BIA, and they have done a tremendous piece of work looking at what the impact for the consumer is in terms of environmental sustainability, because they want to be more environmentally sustainable. But how do they do it? So the other thing which we would like to bring into that, and it's something which we can only really do as a food producer, is there is an aspect of nutrition which is very important to us, because red meat has been on the back foot, and there's been a lot of disinformation over the past 4 to 5 years, and we're trying to right that with good science. Healthy aging is very important to us, and making sure we're utilizing as much of that animal as we can, because it does have a 20 to 26 month life cycle. So things change a little bit slower in red meat production compared to pigs and poultry. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it feels like I want to leave a bit of time for questions.
Yeah.
I think across all of the speakers, there's a whole host of themes that I think we've touched on there. I'm hoping Charlotte's going to spring onto stage in a moment with some of the questions that have come through Slido, but we've got around about 25 minutes that we'll pick up questions. So, Charlotte,
I don't think that was a spring, but I did my best. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions on Slido. Keep them coming. If you're here in the hall, just wave your hands in the air like you just don't care, and someone will come trotting towards you with a microphone. Please don't speak until you've got the microphone. It will be pointless. And do tell us who you are. And where you're from, if that's relevant when you're asking your question. Okay, brace yourselves, chaps. Let's start with an anonymous again. How can we support farmers to be more businesslike, as Andrew suggested?
We need farmers in general of this generation are becoming much better at it. They're better trained, they're being very much proactive, aren't you? You guys are looking for it. People of my age, I'm 58, we're in this in-between generation of those who, I embrace change, I love change, but not change for sake. I will actively go out and seek the new stuff. I want to know what's going on. Farming is a really exciting profession. Agriculture is a fantastic industry. It is by education, and I think it is, I mean, there are various research bodies here who have so much information about evolution and change for people. They need to do so. I mean, you're better qualified than me to answer this one now. How would you say? What's driving you to change? What's driving you to become a better businessman?
I'd say, yeah, change is scary.
These exciting changes.
For like my dad's generation.
Me?
Yes. But I think, yeah, it's exciting, and like the potential to work towards achieving more sustainable, better production, and also, like I discussed earlier, that work-life balance that I think is really important in keeping highly skilled people in the industry.
But there are opportunities for the likes of you, Steve, and you as well, because you can help train your farmers. You can help as part of your sort of grower schemes to make them better businessmen, because everybody wins then, don't they? So there is an opportunity in many different ways, I'd say.
Okay, I'm going to move on simply because we've got quite a lot of questions. John Williams asks, how do we ensure that new innovations and technologies actually deliver solutions, I wish these wouldn't keep moving, to real issues to avoid developing technology and then looking for an issue to solve? Phil, that might be one for you, really.
Yeah, good question, but I mean, that's kind of links back to what I said at the introduction. The bit that motivates me is, what are the challenges that businesses have and how do we fix them? Otherwise, because that's where I think we were kind of in a bit of a bubble and possibly looking at what ideas have we got and then going in search of a problem to fix. Actually, much rather sit down in a room with the likes of Michael, the likes of Steve, and work through actually what are the challenges. And listen to some of the issues that you're facing and then work out actually what's the way of helping that. And that's
I'm going to support you in this one, because I think if I go back probably 10 years ago, there was quite a lot of chat which seemed to be science for science sake, rather than actually trying to fix a problem. So I do think that the work that the Agri-Tech centres have done about creating links between different actors in the supply chain at least has allowed kind of common themes to come out and therefore focuses to try and address. Probably not perfect, and it probably never will be, but better than it was, definitely.
And there's still going to be bits where we need the science and the research, right, to inform policy, to help move things along. But yeah, trying to go in search of challenges.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're doing this exercise again, to talk to farmers and growers about what their challenges and needs are, and to link that with what the solutions might be in terms of the innovation. And when we did that back in 2013, obviously that was just before the Agri-Tech strategy, so that report that we produced actually fed directly into the Agri-Tech strategy. And then I did a review of that 4 years later, just in time for the industrial strategy, and that fed into that industrial strategy challenge fund, Transforming Food Production, which is a really important programme that the FIP then developed out of. So we do need to regularly check with the practitioner, with the end user, what is it that you're struggling with? And there'll be common things, but then the emphasis will move over time.
Anybody else want to? Michael?
Yeah, thank
And
you.
then Tim.
Yes. Sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's really important to also recognise that there have been huge advances in terms of innovative technology. It's the uptake of it is where the focus really needs to be now, and we would welcome further opportunities to engage with the public sector in terms of how we actually go about that, because the carbon conversation is very much being had, and the solutions are basically there and they're known. Yes, there's probably some consolidation that's required in terms of how that's messaged, but I think that to really look forward to the other things which are coming down the pipeline, as you touched upon rightly so, in terms of water quality, biodiversity, this is more and more work it's going to end up with our food producers. So how do we actually get them over the hurdle of understanding greenhouse gas emissions and what they're doing about that over a 2 to 3 year cycle, and then build on that? And that's where I think there needs to be more alignment and more support.
Tim?
Just a quick one. I think it's a really good point. And when we started developing the Farm and Innovation Programme, which I mentioned earlier, the feedback we had from working closely with farmers and stakeholders was that we've got these world-leading research institutes around the place. I mean, they're fantastic. They are generally world-leading, but we don't always necessarily do the kind of long-term research that's needed. So we've baked into the Farm and Innovation Programme, FIP, a large element of farmer, grower-led research. So, encouraging farmers and growers to come together to build consortia, and we've still got a long way to go, but there's that. I'm really pleased with the way that's going so far. We've got lots of interest, so lots of bottom-up ideas coming through.
We're going to take a question from Flora in just a minute. Just a quick one, Tim, while you're speaking, from Ben Williams. Should DEFRA engage with the Department of Education to ensure that the skills for new entrants in the sector keep up with Agri-Tech? There seems to be little change to curricula to support new talent.
Well, the civil servant answer to that is that's for DFE to answer, of course. But we do speak to them. I have regular contact with them, but hopefully most of you in the room have heard of the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture, which is something that we've developed very much in collaboration with DFE and indeed other departments. DEFRA has put huge, several million pounds into this to get it up and running. It's in response to a clear call from the industry to have a professional body, which it's never had before. And a lot of what we're talking about here today, like the business, element, as well as the sort of husbandry side of things, is all something that TIER is going to develop. So, for me, that's another good, exciting area.
Great. Question at the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Coker from Farm Smarter app. I just wanted to ask a question following on from the FIP that you mentioned. You talked about how to get industry to work with farmers. As a company that has actually been engaged in that process, where we've engaged with farmers and we've come up with a research thing, we thought commercially viable project with the farmers, and then went through the process and found that the assessors said, oh, it didn't quite reach the threshold, which was our farmers found it really disappointing. We found it really disappointing, having spent all that time going through the process. And it completely discourages people to get involved in the process because you spend a lot of time. How do you see this whole process being, I don't know how to put it, made a bit more efficient? Because it wasn't easy getting farmers involved. We went around, we asked them, what is your problem? How do you, and then we based the research on that. But then halfway through, being told it didn't meet the mark. So, I mean, needless to say, we as a company decided we're no longer going to be involved to take part in the FIP because it's just not worth our while. So, I mean, how would you sort of deal with that or approach that?
Yeah. Shall I answer that one, Charlotte? Well, obviously, I don't know the circumstances behind your application, but I know it is frustrating when you put all that effort and time into developing a business case and then you're told it didn't quite reach the bar. But we have a very, very generous amount of money, obviously 270 million over various competitions. We have lots of successes, but it is competitive and there are some bids that just don't quite make the bar. Where we do have set the bar, and sometimes there's some really good projects that we know would, are really quite interesting and innovative. We do try and just squeeze them in, but it's always going to be competitive because given the finite amount of money, and it is frustrating. I appreciate that, but I'll grab you over lunch and you can tell me more about it. But don't give up.
Microphone down here. In the meantime, if you could wave a magic wand, what single thing would you change to positively impact agri-tech adoption and development?
Ever so easy, Charlotte.
Oh, go on.
Make farmers more open to change, less fearful of change. A lot of us are very cautious. Many farmers are quite traditional. It's a very traditional industry. You know this more than anybody at the farms you go on. You meet lots of people who are embracing change, like the two of us here, but that is what I would do. That's easy, really easy.
I mean, I should confess that I first met Tudor way back in 2015 when he was a schoolboy on his father's farm. And as I have grown older, I have gone from sympathising with the young farmers, I used to be president of young farmers, to understanding more their parents' attitudes. When some bright spark comes home and says, you know what, we need to change it all. I mean, I can just imagine if my now 17-year-old son did that to me, that it would be a very short and pithy answer. How's that been?
Yeah, it's a difficult stage. As I explained earlier, coming home with all these bright ideas. But I'm in the lucky camp probably. Mum and Dad were at a stage where they're kind of looking for ideas. They've put a lot of responsibility on me. I've taken on the sheep flock and the grassland management. It's been great. But I know other friends of mine, similar age, aren't having that fortune and are really struggling. I think it's a huge barrier.
Question down here.
Great. Thanks. So it's Vince Gilligan, but I have to say, and showing my colours, I'm chair of Agri-Epi, so it's a slightly leading question, but you've discussed the challenges and opportunities that we face as an industry. I'm interested what each of you think we should do as centres as we plan and we aim to come together. What do you want to see individually from this new entity? And specifically for Tim, and Tim's our sort of mole on the inside, if you like, and very supportive of everything. What does the PM's office think about this as a strategy, and what does the PM think specifically about Agri-Tech and what he wants to see the centres do?
Okay, so Tim, think about that for a minute. We're going to start at the end and move along. What do you want from this new merged Agri-Tech centres?
I think,
sorry, Michael, yeah, sorry.
thank you. I think we've always, from working with our academic partners, we've always benefited greatly from cross-pollination of ideas and seeing what works well in different sectors. We have a project just about to kick off with a leading university at the moment where the program lead is an engineering, professor of engineering. We didn't think we'd be doing that 6-7 years ago. But I think the most important thing for us is, Steve and his team there know their consumers inside out, right down to store design, store layout, merchandising. We need to understand what motivates farmers. We need to understand more about farmer behaviour.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think the review that led to the creation of the suggestion, recommendation for the three becoming one was very much about cutting through some of that fragmentation, some of that lack of clarity about what the agri-centres actually do, a more coherent offer to farmers. So I think it's about, this is an ideal opportunity to give that message across in a farmer-friendly way, I think. And then on the other question about what does the PM think, I don't speak to him very often, but I do know that I speak to his office quite a lot, and he is right behind this. You may have noticed in May there was a Farm to Fork Summit, a food summit, which is the first time ever, I think, there's been that sort of summit, and the PM was right behind that, and a couple of PMs before that, Boris Johnson, he had actually an Agri-Tech type summit in Downing Street. So I think number 10 really get it.
I think Tim's hit the nail on the head with farmer focused. All the work you're doing is aimed at making the farm more productive, more environment friendly, greener, carbon neutral or whatever. So focus on the farmer. Don't stick a scientist who's an absolute genius but has no communication skills in front of a farmer. You'll switch him off immediately. Pick the ones with charisma, the ones that will make them laugh, the ones that will engage in them, and do it on a farm. That's what I suggest.
Probably as beef and sheep farmers, we're quite a long way behind dairy, pork and poultry, so probably trying to encourage the uptake of technology on the beef and sheep farms would be a focus of mine.
Helena?
I'd like to see the catapult do something or the three centres as a catapult do something together around the infrastructure of R&D, the pipe work rather than the pipeline of R&D and KE. Element of that is what I talked about, this idea of having evidence stored that can lead to actionable insights, so that the knowledge that's generated by research gets to far more farmers than just those directly involved in the projects. We talk a lot about innovation in terms of what a business should be doing or could be doing. I think there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen in the in funding mechanisms. I mean, it's kind of maybe boring for some people, but and that has happened, and it has happened through the FIP. But I think there's a lot more work to do, and there's a real potential for. We've heard the leaders at the beginning talking about thought leadership, and the catapult actually being a leader and vocal. That's something that they could do. Never mind the science, sort out the funding infrastructure.
Steve?
We've got a really good relationship. I've worked with 3 of the 4 Agri-Tech centres, and we've done, I think, great work. The one thing I hope that the new structure will enable is probably a greater focus on the business case for change for primary producers. We always struggle with the great science, great projects, but translating it into what's in it for the farmer, as in how does it impact on the bottom line, I think is a real opportunity and a real miss at the moment. Not because anybody's chosen to miss it, it's just that it's difficult for farmers to buy into something if they don't know what's in it for them. And as much as we can influence what people should be interested in, at the end of the day, it does come back to what's in it for the individual.
You're allowed to speak.
Oh, I am allowed to. Okay. I've got a list quite long, but no, I suppose
Make it short.
things continuing to simplify what is a complex landscape, and that's kind of the experience for people that go for FIPS sometimes. Actually, how do we try and make that as simple as possible, increase success rate? I think there's definitely an area around adoption and uptake, but also more broadly about inspiration. And I think exposing to the industry to ideas, and that's what works. So I'm a part-time farmer well, I've got a few cattle. When I go on farm and see stuff and pinch people's ideas effectively, talk about knowledge exchange, it's pinching those ideas. The penny drop moment for me has always happened on farm, not from reading something. There's an area around investment, I think, more broadly. And I suppose, Helena, kind of picking up on what you were saying, for me, I think there's one of the key things that we did as an organisation was invest in research capabilities, because we talk about being world leading in so many areas, but the bottom line was that actually we'd seen a turning off of the tap when it came to research capabilities and capacity. One of the things we had to do as the centres was to reinvent that and provide that. So I guess I'm trying to think through what are the challenges we're going to have in 10 years' time, what are the capabilities we need to be investing in now to make sure we're in a good place to do the research.
Let's take another question here. If I can ask you in the nicest way, panel, short answers. Thank you.
Sorry, I won't ask a question actually, because I think that last question really summed up what this event is all about. But I really wanted to applaud what M&S have done by being the first and I think the only retailer to bring regenerative agriculture to the mass market by launching their loaf of bread made from wild farmed flour. So my question was going to be, what more can retailers do where they actually have skin in the game with the farmer, with the suppliers, rather than just a lot of talk about, oh, we really support the farmers, but actually not doing much. So this was a perfect example where you did have skin in the game, launching your own M&S loaf of bread with regenerative flour.
Thank you.
So I'll try and keep it really short.
Thank you.
Absolutely recognise that to drive real change, we need to be partners in it rather than just customers of it. So the relationship with Wild Farm is a good example. But so is the stuff we've done in net zero impact fertiliser, and there's a whole heap of different things in different supply chains. But it is about shortening the supply chain, having a direct relationship with farmers, picking very, very good processing partners who are aligned to us, and recognising that we don't have all the answers and we've got absolutely no right to be supplied. So we need to work hard to be the customer of choice, and to be the customer of choice, I think it's about resetting the relationship, which I think ties into the comment you were making earlier on around the needs of farming and the confidence that's required from the customer right through the supply chain.
Okay, just a couple of quick things. The most popular question on the Slido. 6 amazing panelists, just 1 woman. 18 speakers, 3 women. Really? Probably a 60-40 split in the audience, says Anonymous. We need to be more representative. Point, I would imagine, well taken. And a final question to you all. Oh, there's one in the hall. I'm just not very good at looking at this. Oh, John, hello. Quick.
I just say I've just been inspired by this gentleman's failure not to get his app produced, because I've got a new idea for him. JCB know every time I get in and out of my tractor how much fuel I'm using and how fast I'm going across the field, as does Fendt, as does Trimble, who is steering our tractors up and down the fields, as does CropScan, who is measuring protein and nitrogen across our crops, and as does soil, who is sampling all our soils and looking at soil organic matter and so on and so forth. We need something that blends all this data and gives us real information as farmers, and it's been protected by people like JCB and lots of other people who are just collecting our data and not letting us have it. So we need a platform where we can really analyse that and improve quality and productivity on our farms. So someone in this room, there must be someone who can do that. So can you get on with it?
Helen.
So have a look at Google British Farm Data Council, John, or we can have a chat about it. It's an effort that we've been working on for a while to to get some governance principles around the responsible use of farmers' data, and to actually turn that into something that means that anyone wanting to do business in this area, that wanting to use farmers' data, will sign up to these principles, and that will give some level of encouragement to the sector to do good, safe data sharing, and then really kind of realise the potential, which I think is quite untapped in terms of data-driven decision-making. But it's so important that companies, as those you've listed, are doing that data collection responsibly. So look it up.
Okay, one final very quick question, because I'm all that stands between you and lunch. What would the panellists do to make farming more rock and roll? Phil, I'm going to start with you because you're nearest.
I'll go farming or agri. So look, I'm going to go agri-tech, right? So yep. One thing that I'm really proud that we've done is we've kind of gone on tour. We've taken our members out to some of our research facilities and capabilities. When you go and see some of the stuff like National Pig Centre, or head over to Aber and see some of the great things there, or head over to Northern Ireland, that's the catalyst for ideas. So going on tour is what we've done. I'd love to see more of that.
Rockstar tours. What more do you need? Ladies and gentlemen, can we thank our panel?